Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. We are very pleased to be here, actually for the second time, because the first presentation of this book, once it was released in English, was here also 2 years ago in 22. So a big up to you for turning out tonight in front of us, and also a big up to Scott for inviting us again. I'm going to do a little introduction to explain the genesis of this book. Jean and I, we actually know each other since the 90s, which is quite a long time. But it's only since the 2010 that we got close to each other. When I was writing in La Gazette de Bali, which at the time was a monthly magazine in French language with the main focus on Bali. And I happened to ask him some illuminations at the time on various subjects or topics, mostly according to the news of the time about Bali or on a larger scale about Indonesia. And for instance, the Bali bombing in 2005, or also I remember an interview we did about the notion of love in Bali. We did that in February, I forgot the year, according to the Valentine's Day. And it was very, very interesting because Jean explored in this interview the notion of love in Balinese culture. And the article was very popular in between our readers on the social media and everything. So by working together for La Gazette de Bali, I also asked him to write full-blown article about many different topics. We thought back then of doing something together. And we were very busy at the time, and we never really came to a special idea until I left La Gazette de Bali in 2018. And at a dinner at a friend in Canggu, we decided to do a book together. And that's how the Bali 50 Years of Changes has started. The idea behind that book at the very beginning, it was to do something that would encompass all possible topics about social evolution in the Balinese society since the time Jean first came on this island in the 70s. Hence the title, Bali 50 Years of Changes. So we know that at that time that many people, actually since the 30s, had written books about Bali and its evolution. Very interesting books. For my part, I've been absolutely mesmerized by a book by Adrian Vickers. Some of you might know it. The title is Bali, a Paradise Created. That is actually the first book that brought to me a deep insight into Balinese culture. And also we have a common friend, Michel Picard, who is a French researcher on Balinese culture. And he had written in the past a very well-known book about the impact of tourism on Balinese culture. These two guys are scholars. They do very interesting book, but in a very academic way. And the idea behind our project was to offer something that would shed a light on the more recent changes in Bali, but also in a more accessible way in terms of reading, something less academic. So
in a way, Scott,
yeah,
a wider scope.
A wider scope, and also a different way to present all these changes. So the idea was for me to interview Jean, as we know it was working with our readers before in La Gazette de Bali, and to ask him, since he came here for the first time, what were all the upheavals that are very often actually in Balinese society minimized or denied. Changes that are so strong that paradoxically people don't want to see. And because maybe Balinese culture has been frozen in time, sanctified in a way to sell the island to tourists. So this denial of seeing, even monitoring all these changes was very strong, and we wanted to separate the myth and the reality, to have a clearer view about it. So that's the purpose of the book. Why a discussion book? I already explained that Jean's interview in La Gazette de Bali were very, very popular. And it was a problem actually when we started to look for a publisher. They were all a bit reluctant to the format. An interview of 400 pages, are you kidding me? And it wasn't, also publishers of this kind of books, they're more accustomed to academics, to scholars, and their way of doing things. So in the end, all publishers were a bit confused, but in the end, we had one in Australia who accepted it, and we did a big work of editing on it, and also of translation. The English version has been translated by Diana Darling. Some of you may know her. She's an American writer based in Bali since a long time. She's also a femme novelist. She wrote books about Balinese culture. And we are very thankful to her for this English version, which is great, which is perfectly translated. Third, we also, how can I say that? I always say that when we do public appearance. Jean is well known in Indonesia as a regular columnist since decades. He wrote in many Indonesian-speaking newspaper. He has a weekly column in Kompas, and he wrote for decades in the Bali Post. He had a column, a weekly column in English. Maybe you
daily column in English, yeah.
Daily.
Yeah. So you imagine a Frenchman, you see, writing the English corner, you see. Yeah. So try to imagine. Yeah.
As he has also published many books in English, so he's quite well known of the English-speaking sphere, intellectuals who love Bali, but sadly, he wasn't much known from the French. So one of the goals of this book was also to have Jean better known by his own community. French living in Bali, of course, they know him. But French in France, not much, I'm sorry to say that.
But perhaps more and more, who knows?
But
you see.
Thanks to this book, more and more, definitely. About the method for this book, I serialize all possible topics of discussion, trying to regroup everything by type, and then we went. We started at the end of 2018 in his home, and we did about 20 hours of recordings. that went on for months,
Yeah,
maybe
for
8 or 9 months,
Yeah.
something like that. And we start to, after we did everything in French, of course, because it would have been a bit silly to try to do it in English, although the goal behind was to have it one day in English also, but we did everything in French. After that, we did the transcription and then many editing, because when you go through a discussion with Jean for 20 hours, things are coming and they come and go, they go back and forth. And in the end, we had many repetitions. So we thought it would be nice to do a very thorough editing of the book. And we cut many repetitions, and we completed some topics that were a bit weak compared to others that were too strong, too much in quantity also. So we try to equalize the whole thing, and it took us quite a long time also.
And I must say, you see, the quality of the question, you see, was paramount. Yeah? Without good question, you only have stupid answers. Yeah?
So in the end, we found a publisher in France first, Édition Goop, with a small publisher specialized in books about Southeast Asia. That's how it all started. And then we had the translation with, by Diana Darling, and then the English version published in Australia. Since maybe some of you have a question about this, the genesis of the project.
If I may add something, you see, I had a big advantage here. I gained access to many sites, many levels of Balinese society and even of Indonesian society, you see. When I was very young, I would go around the island on my bike, and I became well known by, especially after I started working at the Bali Post, yeah, I became rather well known among Indonesian Balinese intellectuals. And one day, you see, I wrote an article about the ancestors from Mecca. You see, my page in the Bali Post was cancelled. It was banned because the army intervened. I thought I would be expelled from Indonesia, but actually some intellectuals from Jakarta, I heard about the English corner, and so they asked me to start writing in Indonesian for Jakartanese publishers. And it's how, you see, I started being well known in Indonesia, you see. I started my writing career in Bali. And now I am a national icon to a certain extent, yeah.
Okay. Since Bali 50 years has been released 2 years ago now, of course, Jean and I, we went to other things, and I happen to be also a novelist, and I just released a thriller, a crime novel in France last year, at the end of last year, and the title in English is Murder in Uluwatu. So it's the typical whodunit kind of thriller, and the story is set in Bali in the 90s, so 30 years ago. It's, of course, I cannot reveal much about the plot because it's a whodunit book, but it's roughly the story of a Frenchman coming to Bali to fetch his Indonesian fiancée because they plan to live in Paris. And when he comes to fetch her, a body is found at the bottom of the Uluwatu cliff. That's the story. So it's been released in France last November, and it's been just translated in English and edited by Diana Darling again. So hopefully, across my fingers, there will be an English version published this year or next year. In the meantime, Jean also has been very busy with his own project, and he's been called by the presidency in Jakarta to write the definitive book of the 2 terms of President Jokowi in office. But I let him explain about that.
Yeah, so you see, I never tried to get in touch with the president of Indonesia. Yeah. But 4 years ago, there was an election. And for the election, we had Mr. Prabowo, the General Prabowo, you see, he rode a horse. Yeah. And so it was to show how powerful he was. Yeah. So I wrote my Indonesian column in Compass, you see the New York Times of Indonesia. And I told Jokowi, using the tu, the formula tu, yeah, you don't need a horse to have charisma. Yeah. It's enough for you to have a white shirt without any dirt. Yeah. So in Indonesian, it sounds very nice. You see, it sounds like a traditional poetry. Yeah. Kau tak perlu kuda untuk berwibawa. Cukup baju kau yang tidak bernodai. So this pantun, this poem, you see, found somehow, you see, place on the presidential desk. Yeah. And then I started being in contact, you see, with people from the presidency. Until last year, they contacted me and they told me, yeah, Jean, what about a book about Jokowi? Jokowi, I had met him a couple of times before when I had been invited with Indonesian intellectuals at the palace in Jakarta. Yeah. So I accepted. But to be frank with you, yeah, now it's another story because politics have changed in Indonesia. So I am writing the book, but now I want to do a number of... the book was going to be written from the outside, but taking into account what has taken place in Indonesia. Now I want to turn the book into a book seen from the inside. So it has to be Jokowi talking about himself through me. And I'm waiting to be called to Jakarta just to complete the job, to make a number of interviews with Jokowi seen from the inside. Why he has taken this and that decision here. Because I don't quite agree, you see, with the way the foreign press treats Indonesia, you see. We use criteria which I am not sure are valid to judge a country like Indonesia, you see. Yeah. The corruption index, the democracy index. Myself, I see things in a historical perspective. Yeah. What is changing for the positive rather than to refer at each moment to this or to that index. But we can discuss about it at the end of the talk about Bali, yeah, if there are some questions from the floor.
Okay, there is something you should have explained about our story also. Prabowo, who is the president of Indonesia now, is a great admirer of Il Duce, Mussolini. And that's why Prabowo likes to ride horse when he goes to his political meeting in stadium. And Jean, with his line in his column, wanted also to pinpoint the fact that Jokowi, who only wears a white shirt like this one, was very pretty much more humble than his opponent of the time. Right, Jean?
Yes, you see, whereas Prabowo would use a horse, yeah, Jokowi had been treated as, you call that in English, you see, as a kusir, as the coach, yeah, as the, what's the name of the, I don't know the word in English, you see, when you have a charrette, how do you say, you see? Yeah, if you have, you see, not a carrossel, you see. Yeah, but so he was insulted as being the coach of an ordinary peasant's cart, yeah. And after he was elected, he went to his palace here, using a peasant's cart, you see, crossing Indonesia using this peasant cart. It was very impressive at the time, yeah.
Okay, so we all know that Jokowi is the humble man. And
he used to be, yeah. But actually, as a person, you see, he's a very nice fellow, yeah. When I met him a few times, I was the one, you see, talking to him, yeah. He was basically listening, yeah. He listens, yeah. And so I have a few other things to say about, to tell about Jokowi, but not now, perhaps later, yeah.
Okay, so I have a question for you. Who among you have already watched the documentary that has been released by CNA, which is the news channel of Singapore, the national news channel of Singapore, with the title Bali, a Paradise Lost. It has been released 2 weeks ago, about. Jean is interviewed in the documentary. And we thought that tonight, to link our presentation of our book, it would be nice to bring it along with this documentary that has been released, and that it has made hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube in only 10 days. It's absolutely incredible. So this documentary has a huge impact on people, it seems. And it's very well made, very well crafted. And the producer, director of this film has contacted me the other day to say actually that he was very thankful to both of us with our book, because he has based most of his preliminary researches on Bali 50 years of changes. So I was very pleased to hear that. And I thought that for tonight, maybe it would be a good start to ask a question to Jean about a topic that is very relevant in that documentary, but also in our book. It's the utilization of the land in Bali. And I would like to ask Jean, for a start, Jean, can you tell us how land was transmitted in the past, historically, and also since when it has become commodified in a capitalist way?
Actually, the issue of the land here is Bali's main issue today. So we can say that the Balinese, as the indigenous people, have lost control over their land, especially all around the island, on all the coastal areas. So we have to compare the situation with the situation 50 years ago. Land had no values. The first time I came to Bali, which was in 72, later it was in 75 for a longer stay, you see. People would tell me, oh, mister, yeah, you can use my land if you want. You can build a house, yeah. At the time, I had started studying Indonesian. Land had no value at all, you see. It was not a commodity. There was a surplus of land. When families had 2 male children, the family would open a piece of land outside of the main household to give the second son so that he could build a duplicate of his father's house. Yeah. Now that's finished. Yeah. There is no land available anymore. And it's one of the reasons why you don't see anymore traditional Balinese houses. You see the open space, wall space, where you have the traditional houses, open spaces. Yeah. Now all the traditional Balinese houses have been divided, or are being divided, between the sons of the families. Yeah. Let me add that women get nothing. Yeah. So it was not a commodity, you see. You had land which was controlled by the princely families, and you had land which was controlled by the villages. Yeah. Before the colonization, you had no titles. Yeah. And the land rights were not registered, yeah, which gave actually some power to the princely families when land took value. Yeah. In the 80s, in the 90s, yeah, since people had no land title. You see, the local prince could tell his former peasant, could tell them, I'm sorry, you see, I gave land to your grandfather 100 years ago or 50 years ago, yeah, but you have no title. The land is mine. So the princes would get land back, land that had been given away to their, you say in English, to their serf, to their peasantry, you see.
To their people.
Yeah. So you had no titles, yeah. And it has enabled all sorts of traffic around the land, actually. Yeah. And now we start having Balinese who have no land of their own, since everything is turned into a commodity. Usually, apart from the land where the Balinese build their houses, you see, the villages itself, yeah. Usually it remains into control of the local population. But all the land around the island has changed hands here. Yeah. The foreigners are not allowed to own land, but you have people from Jakarta, from Surabaya, from Java, you see. They have purchased all the land in Bali. And land in places like Ubud is more expensive than on the French Riviera. You see,
But Jean, when this actually started in the 70s,
yeah,
I think it's linked to the development of tourism, right?
Yes. You see, the criminals were the military regime. What did the military regime, especially in the 80s? It started having money, you see, trickling down from the income from the oil industry. So it started providing loans to investors or to the cronies of the military regime here. So what did the military regime do here? They could have provided the local population, the local Balinese population, with loans to set up their small hotels here. Yeah. But instead of opening these facilities to the local people here, they opened the loans to the Suharto cronies in Jakarta. It's how we started having the huge hotel industry, which you see in Sanur, in Kuta, and in Nusa Dua. And now I dare say that perhaps 70 or 80% of the tourism industry is actually into the hands of outside capital. And it's one of the reasons why we start having, you see, crystallization of local identity here. But what I'm telling you here, many people are not aware of that yet. And even Michel Picard, in his book about Indonesian tourism, didn't dare touching this aspect of Balinese reality. Because if you talked about these things 40 years ago, you could be kicked out, you see. Myself, I was lucky not to have been kicked out at the time, yeah. So the local Balinese, they have lost control over their island, basically. Which is one of the reasons, you see, why the culture is not in so good a shape here. Even though the hotels are supposed, you see, to set up cultural activities, the owners are not the local people. They are not the Balinese. So for the owners from Jakarta, from Singapore, from Mauritius, or from other places here, what matters to them, you see, is return of investment here. So, of course, they will have the mouth full of culture, but in reality, you see, actually, you see, they don't give a damn, except for the iconic aspect of culture. So you may have a girl, you see, kind of dancing the legong when she's welcoming tourists here. But it has nothing to do with actual Balinese culture here. Whereas actually, in the 80s, you had a Balinese fellow, he was a well-known doctor in Denpasar, yeah. He wanted to set up exclusively small boutique hotels, yeah, in many villages around the island here. And but to succeed, he would have to be selected as the governor. And before the election of the governor, Mr. Sudomo, Suharto right-hand man, came and told him, hey, come on, man, yeah. You're not up to our standards, yeah, shut up, yeah. And the policy, which was a good policy, actually, to enable the local people to set up their own companies, yeah, it was just cancelled. Of course, in Ubud, you might have the opposite illusion. Ubud is one of the few places where quite a few hotels, quite a few lodgements are still owned by the local people here, not by big capital from Jakarta or from Surabaya. But Ubud is quite an exception, I dare say.
Yeah, if you watch this documentary from CNA, there is a guy, I forgot his name, talking about the fact that actually cultural tourism has been a pill to swallow for Balinese, so they will be happy with the idea that their culture was number one for tourists. And this way, big capital from the cronies of Ordebau before had all the benefit of developing the big businesses. That is what Jean explained just now.
Actually, the Balinese have been cheated by the discourse about tourism. Yeah. At the same time as the central military government was providing loans for generals, for corrupt judges, and for other cronies of the regime. Yeah. At the same time as it was doing that, you see, it, forgot what I was going to say.
But loans to the big guys or what?
Yes, you see, the local people didn't get anything. Excuse me, I had another idea in my head, and it went out of my mind, you see, while I was constructing my sentence in good English, yeah, which I shouldn't be trying to do.
And the irony nowadays is that there are less and less tourists coming to Bali to appreciate Balinese culture, and the whole island has turned into a big, I don't know how you call it in English, a big Disneyland or something like that. It's a bit like Ibiza with millions of beach clubs,
yes,
and disco and party, foam party or anything, boat party, and the Balinese culture, which has lost many of its strengths in the process, is nowadays not even looked at.
Yeah, the more actually, I forgot, it came back. You see, the more the Balinese were flattered.
Yeah.
You see, with the central government praising the quality of the Balinese culture, you see, the less the Balinese had power over their economy. The more national and to a certain extent international capital was taking over the economy of the island. Yeah. And to me, what I don't like is the dangerous aspect of this situation, yeah, because it is creating some of the imbalances the local Balinese are suffering the most presently. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Any question about this particular topic? I would like to add also the fact that Jean said that foreigners cannot own land in Bali, which is true. On their name, they cannot. But as you might know, some of you, if you create a special sort of a company, which is called a PMA, then through the company, you can buy and own land in Bali. And actually, after the big influx of big capital from the cronies of the Baru long time ago, now we have seen since maybe the end of the 90s a different way to own land in Bali to develop villas in the tourism sector. And if we look at it closely, we understand that most of them are owned by foreigners through this company sort of title. So, yeah.
Yeah, so what you can get, you see, you get a provisional title over a piece of land with a freehold lasting some 50 or 60 years, yeah.
Yeah, this is another way to own land in Bali.
How do you do then, yeah? You use the internet, you use LinkedIn, you try to connect half wealthy people in Western Europe, in France and elsewhere, and you tell them you can live in paradise, you can build a villa in Bali for, let's say, 90,000 euros. Yeah. So you do have quite a few naive people from small towns in France, Italy, Germany, and other places here, who take up this kind of investment. But actually, it's usually a kind of Ponzi scheme. Yeah. You see, they invest, other people invest, so they start building a few villas, yeah. But when you have 20 or 30 or 50 villas being built here, yeah, the expectations are not what there should be, and quite a few companies of the kind you see have collapsed. Yeah. So there is a risk with this kind of investment. Yeah. Myself, I was just awed when I read some time ago that some people were going to build 500 villas around Ubud, yeah, totally discarding the circulation of water, totally discarding probably or manipulating, you see, the local system of titles and the like, yeah. And I hope that the speculators are not here, otherwise perhaps I am not very safe, you see.
So, yeah, to make it short, all sort of ways of owning lands are now possible in Bali with big capital, big foreign capital also, and small scale developer. Everything is possible. That's what we see nowadays. Any question about this topic?
Yes, this topic and beyond. It's interesting that you remind how important, how intrinsically land equals culture somehow. Land and culture is so intertwined. But I want to insist, and I wish to hear, I want to insist on the fact that the documentary Bali Paradise Lost, yeah.
Mhm.
It's it's okay. It had so many viewers and it's good, but it's focused on everything we're talking about now. It's so devastating and the decline. And I want to insist on the fact that the book is so much more interesting and captivating because it goes through everything. I wish you could spread.
Yeah, that's the difference between a book and a film.
But specifically this book and this film, I mean, in the book we're learning so much about from the beginning, and not only the changes, but deep that Balinese culture, ethnicity, the love, the religion. It's not a myth, it's not a tale, it's real, but I wish you could spread a little bit more about that, not only what's drastically happening right now.
Okay. Okay, we try to do that tonight to explore this a bit further.
So you want to hear more about Balinese culture, yeah?
Well, it's all in your book already. If you could.
Yeah, I dare say that we have almost next to everything in the book, of course, yeah. I am aware of that, and thank you for the compliment, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
But actually, you see, Balinese culture is deeply changing. And first of all, religion. If you open a book about, an ordinary book, let's say, about Bali, what you read about Balinese religion is the Hindu aspect. Whereas in the actual tradition of Bali, you see, the Hindu aspect is a minor aspect here. Most of the ceremonies taking place in villages are ceremonies addressed to the ancestors here. Of course, you do have Brahmins families here. You do have people who are referring to the Hindu cosmology here. But they are a minority, and they do not control the right, even though the Hindu aspect is becoming more and more prominent here. Perhaps many of you now know the word swastiastu here. let me tell you that the word swastiastu has little to do with Bali. It was imported some 50 years ago, yeah, when the Indonesian government turned Balinese belief system into an official religion. And to be accepted as an official religion, it had to be well structured. It had to add canons. It had to add, you see, a strict system of belief with holy men. So children were taught the Hindu system. And now, if you ask people who are 20 or 30, many of them, they will repeat, you see, the principles of Balinese Hinduism, whereas in their village, they practice ancestors' cult or a cult of natural forces. And I must emphasize that in Balinese tradition, the belief didn't have to be stable. Yeah. It didn't need to have canons. That's an Aristotelian mania, which has transformed, you see, the Christianity and Islam. You see the strictness of principles here. Now, it is taking over Bali, of course. Balinese religion is more and more structured. People refer more and more to Balinese Hinduism. And they know much less the old stories. Why has it changed here? Because before schooling, you see, schooling was generalized during the military regime. When the military regime is one of the positive aspects of the regime, opened schools all over the island. But before schools were opened, how were ordinary people educated? They were trained, they were educated by the puppet show theater, by the dance, by the stories, you see, they witnessed when visiting the fellow village where there was, you see, arch dance or a mask dance, or more important than everything, you see, a puppet show theater. So in the traditional system, you see, it's not faith which mattered here. Because faith didn't have to be defined. You could talk about the God from beyond the Couteau tree, or the God from the other side of the river. He didn't have to have any precise name. The forces were there. They didn't have to be named. Even when we use the word polytheism or pantheism, we create an abstraction, we use an abstraction which is structuring. But for the local people, no. You see, faith was not thought about. Now, this is changing, because at schools, young people are told that they are Hindu. And being Hindu, they have to refer to the Hindu cosmology. They have to refer to the Trimurti. And because they have to refer to the Trimurti, some 50 years ago, the three temples of the village were called by names from the Hindu Trimurti. But traditionally, you have the ancestors' cult, and of course, the interpretation system mastered mostly by the Brahmins and by well-educated people, yeah, was more or less Hindu, even though the word Hindu didn't exist. Whereas now, you have people being sent to villages to teach villagers the new ways. If you go around the island of Bali, you see a Padmasana, you see a shrine addressed to the unique god, to Shiva. People will tell you it's addressed to Shiva. But if you inquire a little, you will hear in many instances, because it existed, of course, yeah. But in many instances, the village was kind of, if not compelled, was influenced in such a way that the village would build this shrine addressed to the one God, even though before the one God was of little importance because the godly didn't have to be defined, which is something difficult to understand for people from the Abrahamic tradition. Now, as a sort of conclusion, we are witnessing a transformation of a tradition into a system of faith in which people are increasingly referring to Mother India, just like Muslims 30 years ago were increasingly referring to Mecca or to Saudi Arabia, which in Indonesia, as elsewhere, just a few people did previously. So we are witnessing the transformation of a local tradition into a religion, both national, recognized in the late 50s, and international. To be frank with you, I'm not sure it's a good evolution, because at the same time, we are witnessing the politics of identity. For the last elections, for example, and the election before, people who were elected at the local senatorial seats, half of them represented what would be the far right in France or in Germany. So, at the same time, it hasn't yet, and perhaps it won't, take the dramatic form it has taken in a few Muslim countries, the phenomenon of religious radicalization. But the risk is there. For example, you see, Eric talked about my column. When I arrived here, you see, 2 hours ago, I completed a column which is going to be published in 3 days from now. I wrote it about tolerance, you see, about telling the Indonesian to revive the old tradition of tolerance. And what is this tradition of tolerance? It's not the Western tradition of tolerance. The Western tradition of tolerance is based on law. The local tradition of tolerance is that you don't see differences. You think that people are the same. You refuse to see differences. And this aspect of Balinese and Javanese tradition, in spite of what I was just telling you, see, a few minutes ago, is still there, you see. It's one of the reasons why Indonesia hasn't turned into Saudi Arabia, let's say.
Any question? Yeah.
I want to go back to the original concept of land that we were talking about.
Yeah.
And Bali has a mono-economy. It is the mono-economy of tourism. That's basically the economy. It has not been diversified. Very little, a little bit during the pandemic. But let's go back to land, which is also in conflict with tourism. Indonesia, Bali is an agrarian society historically. Sawah, which are the rice paddies, and subak, which is two things, is the water. If you go looking in the rice paddies, you will see a narrow flow of water. That's not just, it is an instrument, a vehicle that comes from Batur, that's where the water flows from, but it's also actually a very spiritual vehicle also. It is an area where, as Jean was talking about, not just Hinduism, but animism, etc., of how the function of it. So what I'm trying to bring out is that land has got a completely different concept here besides food security. A lot of us think of our land as food security. And what's happening now is that all of that is being wildly diminished because the Sawah, which is really food security for the Balinese, although they've been importing their rice for a long time now, because there is enough land to feed the Balinese even now. There's enough Sawah, but because of the 17, 19 million tourists, and I'm including domestic tourism also, that come each year, there is the need to import rice. But let's go back to the major conflict of Sawah.
Yes, actually, you see the cost of production of agriculture in Bali, you see, are much higher than in other parts of the island. That's one of the reasons some of the land in Bali has remained idle. And that's one of the reasons as well why we don't have now that many beautiful rice fields as we used to have, because people are turning their rice fields into vegetable gardens throughout the island.
Some of that in Karangasam, I understand that, and maybe Bedagul, but basically the fact that land, which has got a very sacred underpinning here, is now being, as you were saying, commodified, completely commodified. And there is not, there is the corruption aspect, there is the greed aspect, all of this, but it has really transformed Bali. And I'm talking about as a sense of place, because of all of the, as someone who has a background in this, the first time I came here and I'm walking through Sawah and I'm seeing a building, I'm like, what the hell? Why is there a building in the middle of Sawah, which is food security?
Of course, you have had at the same time total transformation of the land use, you see. When I first came to Bali, you see, I could go from Ubud to Nusa Dua on my bike in 1 hour, you see. It was green everywhere. Now you have buildings along all the roads here. And you have villas being built in the middle of Sawah here. So it destroys many of the most beautiful landscapes of Bali. But as you are pointing out, or going to point out, you see, the transformation of the land use has also other consequences here. Now, no more than 20% of the Balinese GDP, you see, originates from the agriculture. At the same time, if you ask the Balinese what is defining them and their culture, they will tell you it's the land. So there is a gap, you see, between the perceptions they have of themselves and the reality of their economy. Of course, it has potentially tragic circumstances, even though it's still worse in some parts of Bali. For example, it's still a tradition in quite a few villages here. When you have the Odalan, you see the temple festival at Batur here, what do? You see? You go there, you bring offerings, and you bring part of the crop, you see. And the priest there, you see, the Jero, you see, or Jerogede, or French Jerogede, yeah, will give holy water, you see. So you have an exchange between symbols and reality. But these things are even now changing, you see. The traditional priest in charge of the water of Batur, I know one of them, the fellow is taking up, you see, a master's in anthropology. So now he's trying to structure, you see, the restructure, you see, in order to retain some control over the system. That's also another aspect, you see, the birth of local intellectuals here.
I just wanted to add,
Yeah.
the basic thing I was saying about land is the inherent conflict. Agriculture needs land and water, and therefore and agriculture historically has used 70% of the world's water throughout the world. Now you have tourism. Tourism requires, for some reason, it's now, Western standards with pools, with spas, with all these things that are using the exact same things that agriculture needs, which is land and water. And that's why, if anyone was here 10 years ago, you remember that 9 years ago, there was a terrible drought in all of Indonesia, but specifically in Bali, and that drought was actually man-made drought. That was not because there was plenty of water. It was just
If you allow me, you see, the phenomenon actually has been lasting for a very, very long time, yeah, until the beginning of the 20th century in Bali. Population was not even 2 million people. You had almost everywhere in the island. You had land that could be cleared. For example, if you go to Bedugul, if you go to Kintamani, you might see mosque there. Some of the people who are Muslim people who are living there are people who were freed by the Dutch colonials after they occupied Karangasem. You see, the former slaves, or panjak we call it, they could go anywhere they wanted. And quite a few of these Muslims, they settled where there was still a free land to clear, you see. And until perhaps the 30s in the last century, you see, Balinese would leave their village of origin and go west to clear land. And between one village to the next village, you often had woods or forest. Yeah. So it was in this forest that people used to withdraw, to face, you see, the forces of nature. So you had the meditation space, you see, in the middle of the wilderness. Yeah. So from that, you have also the circulation of the barongs and the like. Yeah.
Can I just ask a
Yeah,
question?
I think also we couldn't understand this phenomenon if we don't put it on a wider scale, the one of a developing country, which is Indonesia. Because what you said can be said about Kalimantan, the same. What you said can be said to Sumatra, the same. If we take the example of Kalimantan, for instance, we went from some agrarian situation to the palm oil industry. So it's not tourism, but the effect is about the same. So we have to think also in terms of, on a wider scale, of Indonesia as a whole.
Yes, regarding Borneo and regarding Kalimantan, regarding Sumatra, I have something else to add, you see. When the military took over Indonesia, you see, yeah, what they didn't have any money at all. So they needed income to create a clientele, you see, a political clientele. So what did they do, you see? They used the agrarian law dating from 1960, which had turned traditional land in Sumatra and in Kalimantan, in Borneo, to turn this traditional land into state land. And then this new state land was divided into concessions, which were handed over at a very cheap price, you see, to the generals, to the cronies. So it's how, you see, much of the Indonesian forest were cut during the 33 years of the military regime. Now we have very little primary forest in Indonesia. So they built a political clientele. Much of the Indonesian bourgeoisie of today is the creation of the military regime. They are the children of the cronies of the military regime, which doesn't necessarily turn them into, let's say, an efficient, productive bourgeoisie, not to talk about the proletariat.
I think we have a question at the very back. Yeah, please.
Going back to religion.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Seems like the religion here looks like a huge industry. And people,
Like what?
like from Banjar, like
Industry.
Balinese people,
Industry.
they have to pay like a
Yeah.
huge amount of their income. It seems like religion here in Bali, it's a huge industry. Like, so people, like local people, Balinese people, they have to pay a lot of money to Maku, to Banjar, to buy offering flowers, like to make cremation, collect money. Was it always like this, or it's something new when it's become an industry?
So I would object, you see, to the word industry, because what characterizes the industry is the product. So, but of course, what you're talking about is the monetization of religion. And the fact, you see, that the rules of capitalism are taking over down to all aspects of Balinese religion. Of course, now you can purchase, you see, ready-made ceremonies, you see. The economic aspect is becoming paramount. But it wasn't the case, let's say, 50 years ago, even though it had already started, you see. That's a new phenomenon. And to be frank with you, in the 90s, I wrote in Indonesian, actually it was my first serious writing in Indonesian, about this topic, about the fact that religion was becoming turned into a commodity, you see. Labor was being turned into a commodity, you see. Land was being turned into a commodity. So I talk I wrote about these topics on request from the local government at the time. And then I gave them my article, my piece. They didn't publish it. After a couple of months, I contacted them. I told them, what happened to my piece? You have published the other pieces and you haven't published my piece. And they called me. They were all Balinese, and they told me, "Pa Jean, you are right, but we may not write about these things here." So it was still in the last days of the military regime here. But of course, everything is turned into a commodity in Bali. That's sure. And that's part of what is transforming the system. Because at the same time as the system, as tradition, as land, as religion are being totally transformed, the discourse, the official discourse, is that Bali doesn't change and it remains as iconic as ever. Of course, because now it's the whole society that is being turned into a commodity.
Yeah. Any other question about the land or religion?
Yeah, I thought I would like to ask, with what we've been talking about, how you view the future. You know, this is a huge place for transmigration because the standard of living is high, and people come from many, many islands and take over the jobs because they don't have the prachada, etc. So I'm just trying to understand. Right now, there's about 20% of the island that is non-Hindu. And my question is,
Of course, yeah.
What do you view as the future of Bali regarding this one little island?
Of course, you see, one of the political problems here is that we see a constant increase in the non-native population. The policy of the government is, of course, to under-emphasize, you see, ethno-demographic changes here. And the Indonesian government has engineered, you see, a symbolic system that emphasizes togetherness, the unity in diversity, and the like. Yeah. But you nevertheless have the reality. And the problem is the day when we have not 20% of outsiders in Bali, but 35%. And we do have elections. And we do have more and more people focused not exclusively on Bali, nor on Balinese Hinduism, but people who are focused on what is taking place in India and what is taking place in Indonesia. I don't want to be pessimistic here, because I know, you see, from my own experience here, from having given, for example, talks among the people in Indonesia who are in charge, you see, of maintaining the so-called resilience of the country. You do have people who are aware of the issue here. So it's going to depend on politics in Indonesia. And myself, I have been able to discuss the topic with the president here. But I did that in front of the Minister of Religious Affairs here a few years ago here. So people are aware of the risk, because the risk on Indonesian unity in Bali and elsewhere if you have transformation in the ethnic composition of the population, people have different religion, and politics become involved. The indigenous people feel they are losing their power. The migrants are better educated, and they take over the main positions, like in Borneo, and you end up having a civil warfare here. So I am not pessimistic. It will depend how it's being managed. Because believe me, if there is a tradition which is important in Indonesia, and I think it's alive in the heart of most Indonesians, is to build togetherness. Indonesians emphasize similarities more than differences. You might read, you see, if you read, you see, let's say, research made by Muslim modernist open-minded institute, you might read that the majority of Indonesians in Java or in Sumatra want Indonesia to have Sharia law. Yeah? You might read that. But people who are saying they want Sharia law, perhaps they don't know what it is, Sharia law. Yeah? So I don't see, you see, I have lived a lot, not in Indonesian circles, you see, among artists. I've written quite a few books about Indonesian art. Now I know quite a few people in Indonesian politics, yeah. I am still positive, you see. To give you an example, when I'm invited to Jakarta for discussion within the inner circle of the staff khusus, special staff of the president, yeah. You have 15, 20 people there. You cannot believe. The atmosphere is much nicer than when I try to get to the governor's place in Bali, you see. You can discuss totally freely. And if it's Ramadan, they will tell you, Jean, it's Ramadan, but perhaps you want to eat. Here we eat or we don't eat, it's the same. And you have many people of the kind in Indonesia. Many people who believe in nationhood, not in the nationalist, nasty aspect of the nation state, yeah, but in building togetherness. Yeah. Of course, some of you will tell me, oh yes, Jean, togetherness, what is taking place in Papua? I know more or less what is taking place in Papua. And I know it might change very soon. Yeah. You see, until a few days ago, for each bullet shot in Papua, the president was asking to be sent a special report here. Papuans may be discriminated by quite a few people in Indonesia. You might have racism here. But at the higher levels of the Indonesian state, you have people who are aware why Papuans want to be independent, because their forest has been savaged as well, because they are being swamped by newcomers. They are aware of that, and we can talk about that. So I remain positive, you see, regarding the evolution. Especially, you see, the strength of Indonesia, you see this feeling of creating harmony, under-emphasizing differences, and focusing on similarities. Yeah. So we have a positive brand of nationalism, unless what we have in the West, especially now.
Yeah, you might all have understood that nationalism in Indonesia is a cement to gather people together instead of being something that excludes others, which is how we understand it in the West. Okay, so we tried to cover several topics already, from land to religion. And I think there is another topic which is always a favorite. It's about women's rights. I think there is a lot to say about this particular topic. And also it relates to the documentary that some of you have watched already, the one from CNA. And we understand that the tourism boom in Bali has also allowed women empowerment. So maybe Jean could explain to us first what was the situation of women before the boom of tourism in Bali and what it has become since. Jean?
So you see, regarding Balinese tradition, perhaps many of you see, are impressed by Balinese women, you see. The way they behave collectively, how pretty or beautiful they are when heading to the temple. But at the level of the woman's condition, women have no rights in Balinese tradition. They have no rights of inheritance. Inheritance is given fully to the male children.
But John, there have been changes about that. Can you develop also?
Yes, you have the possibility now to give part of your property, of course, to your daughter as well. But it means you have to take the necessary steps here. And I know quite a few Balinese women who are feminist in their speech, but who do accept the rule of the tradition in matters of inheritance. Yeah. I had a friend of mine, she became the first senator of Bali after 1998. Yeah. She was a Brahmin. And she wrote, and she asked me to write at the same time about the possibility for Brahmin women to open their own temples and to have their own ancestors, you see, sitting, I translate from the Balinese, into her own temple, and she couldn't gain acceptance. So the condition of women traditionally is very difficult. Regarding sexuality, not love, women traditionally were not given any choice here. I know some Balinese people will tell me it's not true. But I have heard quite a few people making jokes or telling me stories of women being compelled to perform sex without their own will. It was considered as normal. Of course, if you read the literature, you will see that it was banned to elope women by force, to compel a woman to have sex by force, yeah, was banned by the Dutch government. The reality for many, many years didn't change much. The name changed. People will tell you Plugandang doesn't exist, but you have the word ngejuk, which means to take. So this has long been the fate of Balinese women. Of course, how do I know that here? Because of my years with the Bali Post, you see, where I heard so many stories, dark stories in the matter in Bali. But after education, you see, came, things started becoming better, because usually women are better at school than boys here. So now we have more and more women taking up important positions at the level of the local government, at the level of the university, at the level of the medical schools. But in spite of that, you see, a couple of weeks ago, I was asked to help Balinese friends, you see, who were welcoming a group from Germany, Switzerland, Britain, Denmark, and other places, because they wanted the art school of Denpasar to get an international ISO, you see, I forgot the name, yeah. Accreditation. Yeah. So I went there, and you see, among the visitors, they were from Europe. You had 2/3 of women. But on the Balinese side, you didn't have one single woman here. So these Europeans, they told me, how is it possible? You see, you don't have any woman. I put myself on the side of the males here. And I told them, now you see people who are in power at the universities, they were educated in the 80s, yeah, when universities were mostly with male students here. In the next generation, you will have more women. But still, it sticks here. For example, a couple of weeks ago, I went with my wife here to see a fantastic event, you see, a fantastic dance in Eastern Bali, you see, which had been set up by a woman who is a teacher, a dance teacher at the art school. Yeah. So I went there, you see, and I am a male, I am a white male, people have heard about me, I speak now quite good Balinese, so of course I was invited to sit among the Brahmins. Yeah. Yeah. But where were the women who were setting up the fantastic event, the dancers? Yeah. Yeah. They were serving the coffee, you see, in the lower stairs of the Brahmins mansion. My wife was there and she saw it here. So tradition is very well, is very nice, yeah. But in tradition, these things, you see, the basic status and equality tends to stick, yeah. Which is why women, as well as men from lower caste, you see, yeah, tend to go to the city where they gain equality. Or if they get some money, whenever you have a traditional event, there you have the king, you see, and around the king. So perhaps if you are very wealthy, you will be respected here. Otherwise, you will have to sit in another hall or to sit in lower stairs. But if you are next to the king or next to the Brahmin, yeah, you will be the first to get your cup of tea. And of course, why do I like it? Because I am among the first to get my cup of coffee.
But John, let's try to analyze the situation of women empowerment among villagers, more simple people. The tourism industry has brought many position, employment on the island. This has allowed women from the village to empower themselves because they gain some financial independence. Can you explain that to us?
You see, Eric would like me to be a teenager, yeah. I would like to behave like a teenager, but my wife is here, you see. So I don't dare behaving like a teenager. After standing for 1 hour, you see, I got my back aching. Yeah, regarding, you see, the impact of education on the status of women.
And their newly gained mobility also.
Yeah, their newly gained mobility. You see, one of the positive aspects of tourism, it has grown so fast. Yeah. It has provided jobs for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of women. Yeah. Which means we do not have in Bali, you see, the kind of prostitution problem you will find if you go to the Philippines or to Thailand, you see. Women are becoming integrated within the modern capitalistic economy. So if the capitalistic system is transforming the condition of transmission of land, it has a positive impact for women and for people of lower status. Because if you are in a village, the old stratification continues functioning, you see, in the positioning of people, in the use of Balinese language. But once you are in Denpasar or in Nusa Dua, it's a modern system that is active. And you might have in Nusa Dua, you might have a chokorder or the son of a Brahmin priest, yeah, serving you coffee or food at a restaurant. Yeah. And if you are a Brahmin, the situation happened to me. I found myself with a friend of mine and he invited me to a restaurant, and the fellow who came to serve us food was the son of his surveyor, the son of his son, the son of the high priest. Yeah. So the son of the high priest was serving him. So what kind of language to use in such a situation? People become awkward, you see, which is also one of the reasons why at the city people tend to shift from Balinese to Indonesian. To a certain extent, Balinese is a reactionary language, whereas Indonesian, and even more so English, are the languages of modernity, new freedom, women's emancipation, emancipation of the people from lower jabber caste, lower caste, and the like. Yeah. Modernity is not only negative, and even now, better. something I didn't know in my first years in Bali. Now you have a couple of Balinese who are talking about intersectionality. You see, they are picking in Western books of anthropology or philosophy, you see, the latest theories here. And it's very impressive, you see, which means for them, they don't want to continue following what is happening. They want to be in charge of their own future. It's why we have politicization, we have crystallization of identity and the like. You see, it's a very complex mix-up here.
Jean, we have a question there, please.
Yeah, I was wondering about the place of the social media in the empowerment of the woman, because I know that today TikTok and Instagram have a big place in Indonesian, I can't say culture, but they're a lot on the social media, and as that they say, they can see the women on this media and they can use that.
Yeah.
So I won't talk about the negative aspect of the social media. I think it's basically the same as what we have in Western societies here. But one of the impacts of social media here, which is actually continuing the impact of television. So you have a transformation of cultural memories. People, and some of them tell me, you see, they don't know anymore. Many of them don't know anymore the stories that used to be told by the elders or during the dance ceremonies or puppet shows ceremonies. People are not interested by that, you see, anymore. Yeah. Even though the government is trying to counter-react, but it doesn't quite work, you see. People complain that transmission of knowledge, transmission of language is not taking place. And in my own estimate here, whereas until the 80s, perhaps, local culture was making up perhaps 70, 80% of the total circulation of culture here. Now I think Balinese culture, Balinese real culture here, perhaps amount to 20, 25%. I don't know whether you agree, Nassia. So the local culture is shrinking, is being replaced by the national culture and also by the international culture here. Yeah. For example, you see, for those of you who watched, you see this Singapore video, you see, what was I? I'm going to say, I forgot again here once more. Yeah.
You are telling in CNA that most the lecturer of Budayana talking about postmodernity.
Yes, people will talk about, you see, the big names of, for some reason, especially French philosophy or French sociology, you see, Foucault, Baudrillard, Derrida, you see, is very fashionable. But they don't know the mechanism of distribution of land in Bali. How land has been alienated here. And one of the problems when they pick up, you see, these Western theories, is that usually they do not have in their background the historical construction of these theories. You see, a theoretician for them is a genius. Like an artist, you see, for example, Leonardo is a genius, but they are not aware that these people were bathing into something which was not individual. There was a humus in their genius here. Darwin didn't come alone, nor Leonardo didn't come alone, you see. You had Vasari, you had Alberti, you had all the great names of Italy, you see. So the Indonesian thinker, usually, and excuse me, in Asia, do not have this historical complexity when they discussed the latest theories here. I don't want to discard, you see, their attempt, because sometimes, of course, you do have very interesting things being done. And believe me, perhaps one of the interesting aspects of the book here, excuse me to be a little narcissistic here, is that I have lived in many milieux of Indonesian society. I know the modern artists, you see, the traditional ones, the ones in Jakarta, and they are part of my social surrounding and perhaps my narcissistic build-up.
Okay, to go back to your question, it's obvious that as anywhere in this world, social media has brought positive aspects and negative ones, of course. It's true that on a specific scale, it helps many people, like it does in any developing country, to figure out what is happening in this world out of their own shell, out of their own context. So there is bad and good to it, obviously. If you want to add any other question, please.
And you have something interesting, you see, in some circles in Denpasar and in Couteaus. You find some young children, and their parents will be very proud because their children speaks better English than Indonesian. Because the kids, they can spend, you see, 18 hours, you see, and you just, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I was wondering as well, because I think that it's especially like really international, that being interested more and more into like other culture. For example, if I take France as an example, we are more and more interested into Buddhism or other kind of religion than just Christianity. So I think that just looking for other philosophers, and it's more something like worldwide. I feel like America as well is going on this side. So I think it's just like normal that Indonesia is more interested in what is going on outside and what people think and what is going outside.
It's true also that social medias are a medium where you can express yourself and make your own culture known to the world. And I think Indonesians are very good at that also.
And you have some strange things here. For example, the fashion among some Indonesian women, you see, online, to try to get a Turkish man. And you know why? Because the Turks, they are white and Muslim, so it works. So you have this fashion, you see, to find your partner elsewhere, yeah. Especially among Muslim whites here. They have two positive aspects here.
Yeah, at the back there. Or
So,
you?
Jean, in the 70s, part of the 80s, when you were here, the first couple of decades, you had the luck to meet the people that bridged Bali, the first wave of tourism in Bali in the 1930s. Lempad and Rudolf Bonnet and others. So because you met some of them and you were very lucky in that, bless you, you know. Have you ever had the chance to talk to them about the changes that happened already there from the 1930s to the 1970s, 80s?
Yes.
To see their opinion about that as well, you know, in the
Yes.
Balinese culture.
You see, during my first stay in 75, yeah, my second stay, the first one was just a few days, yeah, in 75, I met Rudolf Bonnet. Yeah. Rudolf Bonnet is a fellow who is at the origin of Balinese painting with elongated bodies, elongated arms and legs and the like, you see, more or less following the rules of anatomy. And I asked him what he thought of what was taking place in Balinese art here. And he told me he hoped that Balinese art would develop in the same way as the school of Pisa or Pisa, you see, Fra Angelico and the like, you see, was at the origin of the Italian full Renaissance. Yeah. He was expecting a sort of repeat of the process of enlightenment in Bali. Yeah. And what is interesting is that much of his influence hasn't followed the path of the school of Siena, not Pisa, the school of Siena. Yeah. The Bonnet influence have been turned into patterns. Yeah. But at the same time, if you go to Couteaux, to the north of Ubud, you might see artists who are depicting a Balinese tradition that doesn't exist anymore. So you have the barong, you have the puppet show theater, you have Odalan, but you have no cars, no, and you have only peasants here. An idealization of Bali, but with a system of representation which has become very realistic here. So on the one side, you have crystallization of the old patterned system. At the same time, some people have picked up, you see, the analytical approach from Western tradition. Of course, at a broader level, I know Indonesians, very few, who are functioning intellectually, just like myself here, with very similar references, with similar conclusions. So I do not believe in the difference, absolute chasm, gap between so-called East and West. Yeah. You have many people who are functioning, you see, with abstraction, with accumulation of knowledge. And so Indonesians are, on the one side, very different from Westerners as a whole, because if compared, for example, with the French, yeah, they put the accent on similarities, whereas the French emphasize differences, conflict, discussion. Yeah. But at the intellectual level, there are many, many similarities, probably owing to the modern world. Yeah. I don't know whether I answered your question.
At the back there? Yeah?
You spoke about this a little bit, but I'm curious with Buvelot, what you expect in
Prabowo for Bali.
Prabowo.
Oui, Prabowo for Bali. How does it look like?
I don't know Prabowo's position regarding Bali, but I don't think it will be very different from that of previous presidents. Yeah. Even though Prabowo has been educated in a Western way. He came to Indonesia when he was already a young adult. Yeah. So perhaps he tends to have a perception of Indonesia, which is a perception of the golden children from Menteng in Jakarta. These people who have been educated abroad, who came in Indonesia as adults, and their nationalism is a nationalist people who feel they own the country, you see. Just like old colonials in Europe. Yeah. But they don't know the country. They have never sipped a cup of coffee with a peasant here. Yeah. I must say, when I was a younger man, I would sip a lot of cups of coffee with peasants here. Now I sip my cups of coffees too often with politicians.
Okay. No more question about, yeah.
That's one that we didn't talk about it yet. I really wonder about the pollution and what is to be done about the pollution, because I feel like it's better in Bali. So I've been traveling in Lombok, Flores, and Denpasar, which is an island like nearby Flores, but they're not aware about pollution at all. And as a Western person, it's
Pollution.
really different to do and to realize that just see like some people just like drinking a bottle of coffee and just throwing it on the road like without any awareness, you know. So I was wondering if there is like more education about it, if like the new government plans to do something about it. I know about the
It's quite difficult to answer this question. Me personally, I've been here about 30 years, and 30 years ago the problem was the same already, not at the level it has reached nowadays for sure. And people were saying education is the key, or it was 30 years ago and nothing has changed. So, Jean, what's your take on that?
Yes, yes. Even though there are a few people, you see, who are becoming aware of the situation. But I must say, usually you see it comes from Westerners, yeah. Yeah, and which is a problem in itself, because Westerners are too often lesson givers, and Indonesians do not like to be given lessons by outsiders, by foreigners. Yeah. But it might be changing. Of course, one of the problems we are being faced with, that the Indonesian mentality for perhaps 60, 70%, perhaps 80% of the population is still very much a collective mentality. People do not have the autonomy of the individual person. So it's one of the reasons why they stay away from this kind of awareness. Yeah. At the same time, it explains the way they vote, yeah, because they vote according to the way you see the village chief, to the way you see the Muslim clerk, to the way the vote. You see, there is no feeling of, no real awareness of the complexity of individual interest, collective bargaining, and things like that. It comes up in cities, yeah. But it's a very slow phenomenon. It's actually what the president is trying to accelerate. But it takes time, you see. It took how many years for Westerners to become democratic? Yeah.
It's not only an Indonesian problem, it's mostly a developing country problem.
I was doing a cruise from London to Flores, and I find it like really interesting that literally the Marines, like the people on the boat, always throwing the plastic away in the sea. And I was wondering if there's like a fee or something, because I'm asking here because I have no one to ask about this.
There might be a regulation, of course, prohibiting these kind of things, but I mean, it's never enforced or anything like that.
Yeah.
You see, I know in Reunion Island, I read an article in a French newspaper a few months ago. In Reunion Island, they collected plastic, you see. 70% of the waste that landed on Reunion Island originated from Indonesia.
Well, it has to be said also that maybe you might know it already, that Indonesia is the second biggest ocean polluter with plastic. So there's no surprise. The Indian Ocean, although it's quite wide, that is no surprise that the waste from Indonesia can travel that far.
Except from Australia as well. Maybe rubbish, not from Australia.
Yeah, I guess.
Just like moving. But today you just like diving between like literally plastic bags around. And I find it like really sad for a country really new for the diving, the snorkeling, which is like beautiful reefs and that
Yeah.
being polluted, and they just like keep doing it even if they see the problems around. They just keep like.
But who are the big polluters here? Nestle and Danone, you see, people who are producing these huge bottles here.
I was wondering, is there any obstacle to a Bahasa translation of your book
In,
in Indonesian?
so regarding the translation of my book here, actually, I hesitated, and I have hesitated here, because perhaps I am wrong. I don't want Indonesians to be upset here. Probably well-educated people won't be upset. I have been asked to do that by a few Indonesians, and I could translate it myself here. I don't know whether I should translate it here. Perhaps.
We discussed that a lot when we were making that Bali 50 years of changes. And in the end, we thought that it might not be a good idea for the reason Jean just told you. And on the other hand, educated Indonesian, they can read our book in English. And many have done so already. And
It has been reviewed in the Indonesian press.
Yeah, we can say that at least among Balinese scholars, the book has been very well received, and we have been supported by many of them, and we benefited also from many articles in the local press in Bahasa Indonesia. So in the end, we are not sure, for the reason Jean just said, that it would be a good idea to have it fully translated, and then it can be misinterpreted or something like that. That's our take on that.
Because I don't want myself to be the lesson giver, you see. Yeah.
And honestly, we don't appear to be giving a lesson in this book. It's mostly an assessment of social evolution in the Balinese society for 5 decades, and I don't think we give any lesson. We're not an NGO.
There is something, for example, we haven't discussed today, you see, is the changes that have taken place regarding to Balinese performances, you see. For the Balinese, for the original Balinese, the notion of stage, with people dancing on stage, was unthought of. You see, the staging place was being set by the spectators, actually. And you used to watch Balinese dances from 2 meters away. What mattered at the time was not the choreography. It was very often the eyes and the subtleness of the fingers, you see, moving. So it was there was a sort of intuitive identification between the spectator and the dancer, you see, because of the music. Now you have the stage, you have distance, you have a full narration, you have, full choreography. You see, the traditional stories are being restructured in order to look like a story. Whereas, for example, in puppet show theater, people, you see the puppet show master never told the story of the Ramayana, unlike what we think. He would pick up a couple of characters from the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, and using these characters, create a story, a new story, totally Javanese, or in Bali, totally Balinese. Yeah. So to say that they perform the Ramayana or they perform the Mahabharata is just an illusion. Just an illusion. Yeah. Just like it's an illusion to think that Bali is Hindu.
Okay, I see Scott coming closer to the stage, so I guess our time is off very soon. I would like to thank you, all of you, for attending the event tonight. Also, I would like to remind you, for those who don't have our book yet, it's easy to find down the road at Ganesha Bookstore or in Periplus outlet in many cities of Indonesia, including Bali, of course.
And
also,
if you want it to be signed, you just tell Scott, and when I come to Bali, I sign it.
Also, for those who can read French, this is my thriller, Murder in Uluwatu. I have a few copies for sale if you want. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Scott, for having us.
Even though we are not trying to make money, you see, it's hopeless.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. That was an amazing 2 hours of history and philosophy, and it was a great download. And everyone, if you leave your contacts downstairs, I think I can encourage these gentlemen to come back in a couple months with some of their books and maybe do part 2. Yeah. Again, really, that was quite a seminar. Thank you so much. Yeah.